Welcome to the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast with psychologist Dr. Doreen Downing. Listen in as Doreen interviews people who felt they didn't have a voice or who suffered extreme speaking anxiety. You'll hear stories about how they struggled to speak up, what they did to find their authentic voice, and the confidence they now feel to speak up and make an impact. If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. And now, here is Doreen.
Hi, welcome to Find Your Voice, Change Your Life. This is a podcast where I get to invite guests who have had certain life experiences where they either felt like they didn't have a voice, they lost it for some reason, and we get to hear about not only their story, but their journey to find their voice. And today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Catherine Lucas, and she's got a story about coming out of the closet around mental health and spirituality. Hi, Catherine.
Doreen, hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. Can I just immediately one little caveat? There is another Catherine Lucas who is also sort of in a pretty related field and is also an author. So I tend to be Catherine G. Lucas, just for everyone kind of listening so that they can find me online.
Beautiful. I saw that, the Catherine G, and I thought, okay, but that's a reason, and I'm glad you clarified it. And this kind of like opens up for the audience to hear how people relate. And she stepped in, right? She stepped in and used her voice to say, "This is me, and this is what how I can be identified." So Catherine G. Lucas. Well, let me read the bio then, the short bio that you sent. Catherine G. Lucas is the author of 4 books on how to move successfully through crisis. Following a profound crisis of awakening, Catherine left an academic career behind to step into her soul's deeper calling. Oh, that's a big breath for me. Deeper calling. And now she gets to help people step into their deeper calling. And her media appearances include BBC Radio 4, Time Warner TV. So this is just a short introduction to you, Catherine. And we're going to open up the conversation and see where we land. But because you are, what is it, 8 hours ahead of me in the UK, obviously this internet is bringing us together. But is that where you were born? I'd like to hear just a little bit about the history and the family structure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was born in the UK, although, we moved around Europe quite a lot when I was young. When I was 6, we actually went to live in Italy for about 6 or 7 years, my family. Now I actually live in Spain, so I'm actually not in the UK now. I'm
Oh.
doing this call from Spain. I live a couple of hours south of Barcelona, so the European blood is kind of, it's there in me. Yeah.
And where are you in the birth order?
Great question. Such an important question. I'm the eldest of 2, and my brother is five
Thank
years younger.
you.
Yeah. But Doreen, it's probably worth mentioning as well, because in terms of where we're going to go with this conversation, is that I do come from a pretty wounded, dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic, and he was in the booze trade. When we moved to Italy, he was working for a very well-known wine company. So we lived in Chianti in Tuscany.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so there's that in my kind of family background, if you like.
Right. When I was at the university, I did some research on children of alcoholics. I'd like to say I'm one too.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, those fathers that for some reason just find themselves in an addictive kind of pattern. And what that means for us as children is, I don't know, I'll just say briefly, for me, it was learning to be really and I think this is a positive thing to be increase my sense of awareness of what's around me, right?
Absolutely.
Because I had to navigate the unpredictable. So, sometimes, I mean, that's talking about situations that might have been difficult or painful, but how we learn something of value for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That really resonates with me, Doreen. And I guess sometimes it's the mothers, you know. I think with my father, you know, looking back now, I can see his own wounding. He lost his father when he was 2 years old. He was actually born about 6 weeks after the beginning of the Second World War. Can you imagine what a time to bring a child into the world? And then lost his father very young. And I think he was just very sensitive. You know, if he was anything like, you know, I do tend to be maybe a little bit more like my father than my mother. So in terms of that sensitivity, you know, he was a sensitive man in a world which at the time, you know, we're going back a little bit now, it didn't really allow men to be sensitive. It was all about, I don't know, kind of old-fashioned male values.
Yes. Oh, that there's so many directions we could go in and uncover. I just feel like, can we talk all day? We're going to really come up with not only the kinds of shared experiences that you and I have had, but also get some deeper insight because what you just said about sensitivity and men, and that's about voices, how
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's not, yes. So moving around Europe, getting, like you say, that blood, European blood in you flowing. I know that sometimes, and I'll just wonder because children who go to new places sometimes have difficulty. Sometimes they feel like they get more adaptable. Sometimes it feels like, ooh, I'm a newcomer. What was that like for you to move around?
Mm. Well, you know, I once counted that I think I went to something like six different schools in 7 years. And
Yes,
that, you know, that's not great for a young child, really.
right.
And, you know, obviously my brother was 5 years younger, so it impacted on him slightly differently. But I think for him, he just always wanted to just kind of blend into the crowd and just kind of just be accepted and just be. I think what happened for me was, and maybe because I also have some Leo in my chart, I think for me, I kind of actually liked being a little bit different, you know, being like the foreigner or, you know, whatever, the English girl. Or when I went back to England, because I did do my secondary education from 12 years on in the UK. Then everybody thought of me as Italian, even though I wasn't. But, you know, because I speak fluent Italian. So, you know, it was, I guess it must have been hard, but I don't remember that. I just remember, I mean, I remember having new bedroom every time we moved to a new house. I was so excited about my, you know, what was my new bedroom going to be like. You know?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Well, I like that perspective. I haven't really heard that much. It's usually about the difficulty and trying to fit in, and like what you said about your brother adapting, but you're going, "Hey, look at me. I'm new here." And that's the Leo in
Yeah.
you. My husband's a Leo, so I really enjoy his ability to stand up and stand out and shine. And that's what I'm feeling like. This is what today with you is like for me, that you're just shining. And I love that you are here and opening up your life story for us to journey through. So we're journeying through your life and you're moving around and becoming more aware of yourself. And where would you say would be some of the difficulties when you look back around finding your voice?
Mm, mm. Well, you know, things were going pretty well, really. You know, I was kind of 16, 17, um, starting to, well, I was, you know, taking part in public speaking competitions, debating competitions, okay?
Yes.
And, you know, in front of quite big audiences and, you know, everything that comes with that, the nerves and the excitement. And then, you know, I went to university and in between basically in between my first year at university and my second year, I had a breakdown. And, it was actually a time when my parents finally split up and divorced. But I guess I was, I was carrying a lot of wounding from, from years of, the family dynamics. And so, yeah, I spent that summer that other university students were like enjoying the summer, maybe getting summer jobs. I spent my summer on an acute psychiatric ward, and that was a
Uh-huh.
shock. That was kind of like I was shattered, my world was shattered. Yeah, and I think I was fairly naive in some respects, fairly innocent. I mean, some of the stuff that goes on acute psychiatric wards is it's not fun.
Oh, well, this is opening up a window that most of us don't get to see. And I appreciate you giving us some insight into what goes on. We see it in movies.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
So maybe a story about what
yeah.
do you have something that personally you observed while you were there? If you
Yeah, I mean, I can feel even just talking about this, not something I talk about very often now, Doreen. So I can feel the kind of the emotional charge a little bit, even though it was like over 40 years ago,
Yes.
that's the trauma, just
Yes.
in fact, ending up in the hospital was more traumatic than the kind of breakthrough that I was going through. It was
Uh,
a really traumatic experience for me. And I think actually, if you don't mind, I think I'd rather not talk about it because I wasn't expecting to talk about it. And I
uh-huh.
think it just feels like a little bit too much.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, beautiful. Thank you for knowing yourself so well and modeling what it takes to, take care of yourself in the moment. I do know that on the same kind of side of it, it's the same thing, but it's just a reframing of it. You called it awakening,
mm, yeah,
right? In your
yeah,
bio, that's what I read, and I did know that there was that breakdown. So I went, oh, look at what you've done. You've renamed it and reimagined it and lived it in such a way that it became an awakening moment for you in your life. So let's talk about it in that
mm.
way.
Yeah, but actually, Doreen, that took a very long time for me to be able to reframe it. And that's
Uh-huh.
partly, so obviously I lost my voice in a sense. If you're in the psychiatric system, you have, patients have no voice, they have no power. Okay. And that was part of my kind of motivation in then, years later finding my voice was I didn't want it to take people 20 years to realize that the experience that they, when we go through these experiences, they have so much potential for healing and for awakening. But the mainstream narrative is that this is, it's pathologized, you're ill, there's something wrong with you. Now, it took me 20 years to kind of turn that around. Eventually, I came across the work of Stanislav Grof, psychiatrist, who coined the term spiritual emergency. Okay, and it's a very complex process because obviously where there's the kind of wounding in the family and the history that I came from, it's not like this was just some beautiful spiritual experience. There were aspects of that. There were certainly aspects that alerted me to hang on, part of this feels like wonderful and amazing and not illness. But there's also, it's enmeshed, like the spiritual aspect of the awakening is enmeshed with the mental health, trauma and all the shadow and all of, so it's a very complex process. And as I said, it took me a long time to unpack it. um, Thankfully I did. I mean, some people never get to. Some people, if they don't, I started, as part of my healing journey, I started moving into the mind body spirit field, and that's where I came across the work of Stanislav Grof. But if I hadn't ever moved into that world, I might never have come across it.
Yes, yes. Well, the mind, body, spirit, all of that moving through you, because it feels like the taking down and taking apart the form or whatever happened to you up until 20 years old, that structure that we take on to survive in this society, but then it breaking down in some ways feels like, well, we all need some kind of breaking down in order to find more about who we truly are and
Yeah.
what's possible for us. And I do know you just said it was complex, but I think in some ways that complexity is what you're all about, is helping people understand, because that's what you said. I don't want people to take 20 years to find themselves. And I guess I relate to that too, about finding my voice, which was a process. It wasn't I wrote a book about it, so it is a long process. And yet we've learned some enough, I think, to go back and say, hey, just like you talked about in the bio, there's a deeper part of you that we can reach.
Mm.
And you know that because you've done that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's the beauty, really, Doreen, when we've been through the process ourselves, like you have with finding your voice, and me with kind of stepping into my deeper calling, and like through crisis. I mean, obviously, not all the people I work with have been through crisis, but a lot of the people that I support, they need to kind of rebuild their lives. But my kind of perspective is that this is an opportunity to upgrade our lives, because now we're more in touch with the truth of who we really are.
Yes.
That's obviously resonating with you.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yes. I love it. I love it. It's the same music. I love to listen to what you're talking about. I need to take a break so that we'll come back in just a minute. And I'm so excited about going further and deeper into, well, how do we do this? How do we listen to our deeper calling?
If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com.
Hi, this is Dr. Doreen Downing. I'm back with Catherine G. Lucas today as we are talking about I was going to say spiritual and mental health awakening, but it's really about becoming more of who we are, because this podcast is about finding your voice. Well, what is the voice that's true? And how do we discover it? And how do we even believe and know and sense into what is actually our true voice? So that's where we are today. Hello and welcome back. Uh, Catherine, we were both getting excited about this idea about deeper calling and the journey. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, I mean, I know journey, both of us took time. It's not just, a hypnosis session where people wake up or EMDR. It really, I mean, for the work that you and I are doing, which is around moving into spirituality, that is that there's a certain energy and a certain vibrancy and life force that's in there, and how to uh, find that. That's what I'd like to talk about now.
Mm, mm. So, Dory, I think probably what's relevant here is this idea of, I mean, obviously, like I said, it took me a while, and in a sense, I sort of I found my voice bit by bit. Okay, so for example, one of the things that happened was, I got a job, I got a full-time, what's it called? I think you probably call it tenure. So I was teaching at university, kind of full, with a permanent full-time contract. Okay, so that was me starting to find my voice. But I still remember to this day the very first lecture I gave to this hall of all these students, and they're all sat in these tiered seats, up into the distance. And yeah, so that was me starting to find my voice and put it out into the world. But I was hiding a big chunk of myself, all the mental health history. I mean, I didn't dare talk about that Certainly not with my students, and not even with my colleagues. Although I did have a particular sensitivity whenever I had, occasionally I'd have a student who had mental health issues, and I always gave them a lot of my time and energy because I had so much empathy and compassion. But that, the first piece, in a sense, of me kind of starting to find my voice was when I was able to start talking about my mental health background without any sense of shame. And that, that basically I started volunteering while I was still working full time at the university. I started volunteering on a psychiatric ward for an advocacy of a patient's advocacy. So it was helping the patients to have a voice because
Yeah.
I know how powerless you are when you're a mental health patient. So I started doing that. Then, cut a long story short, it was clear that I needed to kind of move on, and I decided to leave my academic post, which I think, some people would consider maybe a crazy thing to do, but it just felt totally right. I started working for that mental health advocacy project part-time. And that, the guy who was running that, such an important figure in my life, really, because it was through, his mentorship and encouragement that I was able to just be all of me in that volunteering role and then paid role. I was able to just be all of me because they needed people who had mental health, experience of the mental health system and of breakdown, which even then I still wasn't thinking of it as breakthrough necessarily. So that was an important piece of finding my voice, of kind of like, of starting to become more of me, of the whole of me. And then, over the years, I was also becoming much more. It was around this time that I learned to meditate, and that was the beginning of me kind of moving into the mind, body, spirit world. Because I came from a very secular family. I didn't mention that, but my family was very secular. I don't think I even knew what the word spirituality meant at the age of 20. And so then, then from there, I then ended up working for a mental health charity, very prestigious mental health charity around self-harm. And again, the job description required someone with my kind of background. And it was an exciting role and it enabled me to grow and develop. But I still couldn't be all of me because by this time I was really in the mind, body, spirit world. And I couldn't really bring that to a mainstream secular mental health organization. And again, I decided to leave, albeit after another crisis, because it's important to mention, Doreen, that I had to, in order to really heal, I had to revisit, in a sense, that original crisis. It's like I went back into it 20 years later, but this time I had very different support. I had a very different perspective. And so I was able to kind of move through it. It was still very challenging, but it was, yeah. And it's almost like there was a sense of the healing and the completion. I had to revisit that process. So that's me, it's a process over time of finding my voice. Then obviously when my first book came out, I mean, that was a huge jump up in terms of visibility and finding my voice and getting my message out into the world. Yeah, I've got a copy here actually, if anybody's interested in my first book.
Yes, let's see. I can't read it. Say it out loud.
It's in case of spiritual emergency,
Yes.
moving successfully through your awakening. And
Yes.
it's very much about, the complexity of the mental health, the spirituality, and it's a really practical, down-to-earth book. And it's got a lot of people's personal experience. It's got some of my personal experience, but also a lot of other people who contributed to the book of just what it was like for them going through the process.
Uh-huh. Well, the process, it sounds like what I got from you this time right now is that finding your voice is a process and that it's not just one voice. I mean, you talked about aspects of yourself and all of me and the all of me there, it just seems like more of you kept coming up and that you got to a point and realized you couldn't expand anymore. So you left and opened up a new arena and then a new arena. And in each arena, it feels like you found more of yourself, and more of yourself means more voice.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's a lovely synergy between your work and my work, Doreen, because I help people to step into their deeper calling. And part of that is finding their voice. And like you do, we need people, we need more and more people to find their voice, because when you find your voice, obviously, yeah, it changes your life, but you also get to change other people's lives, and that's the important piece.
Uh-huh. Nice. Well, that's partly what we are doing today is speaking about what is possible for people, and that they can go through processes, and they could do it much more quickly than you and I have done. So
Yeah.
that's,
With the
yeah,
right support, absolutely. Yeah.
right. Your book sounds fabulous around the awakening. So this
Mm.
calling, how do people actually hear the calling?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. It's we feel called to different things at different times, and I think the really important piece. Oops, did I freeze a little bit there? Sorry. I think that the really important piece is that at any one moment we're following our heart, we're following our bliss, we're following our joy, and that basically is the calling. And it may shift and change, although there may well be one underlying calling that where we can kind of see common threads, even if we're called to do two things that look on the surface very, very different. We might actually find, like, this is what the common thread is here.
Yeah.
um so yeah, but now, with it's so important that we are all like just following our hearts, following our bliss, our joy, because that's what's going to change the world. When more and more of us are doing that, then we're going to start to see more positive change.
Hmm. And the actual, because we both understand something about mindfulness, and that's why I was starting to get curious about listening. I think it takes, at least from my perspective, taking the breath, being quiet, coming into the now, because there's so many distractions, and how to listen to my heart. And what is
Mm,
that actually? There's a there's a sense, there's a feeling, I'm kinesthetic, so
right.
I don't know what there's just so many ways to help people be more in tune with what that uh, calling is. There's a book by Greg Lavoie. It is called Callings. Have you heard about that?
I think it rings a bell. I've not read it, Doreen, but yeah.
A long, long, well, in my early training, it was one of the ones that spoke to me, which is about callings. That this book had the title, so it had fascinated me. So he talks about signs, waking up to and listening to your life as you're living it, and noticing, I think. And that comes back to mindfulness and awareness, and
Mm, mm.
and
Yeah, 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 yeah. And actually, part of my journey was that, because I saw that mindfulness was also really, really helpful in coping with crisis. It was one of the key things that helped me through my 2003 crisis. And so I actually trained to become a mindfulness trainer, and worked with people, and that was part of my journey.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Um, so I did that for quite a few years. I was teaching, working with some mental health professionals, with some veterans coming back from Iran and Iraq. It was very rewarding, very beautiful work.
Yes, yes. Well, we're coming to an end of our conversation here. We can stay and open up and see each other again, because this is so fascinating. Have so many more questions about your journey, and how you've integrated. So when we look at coming to an end today, I'd like to just open it up for you to listen into this now moment, and whatever comes to say about your voice, or leaving people with some thoughts about voice.
Mm, mm. That's a great question, Doreen. Um, I think, I think maybe different people find their voice and express their voice in different ways. For some people, it's going to be through writing. For some people, it's going to be through speaking. It may be a combination of all of that. And yeah, I guess finding our voice, and part of what's come from this conversation for me is that it's not like just this one thing. That it's a multifaceted thing that can. It's going to look different for every single one of us. And so I guess I would just encourage people to follow their own individual, whatever that looks like for you, in kind of finding your voice and expressing your voice.
Thank you. That gives our listeners so much more permission to trust what their own calling happens to be, and that finding their voice is, our voices, the multidimensional ways in which we come to know ourselves and then express. And I like that you said express rather than just speak, because it's not all about speaking, it's about being who we are. And that in itself is energy that's being radiating out. And voice is maybe has a sound, but uh, where we're going, I think, is that the idea of voice is coming from a sense of being. And
Yeah,
are
it's
we?
beautiful.
Yes. And then, well, this is opening up a whole nother conversation about the deeper listening, and the how do we listen into even those spaces where words aren't being spoken, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, folks, stay tuned. We'll be back. Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you for inviting me, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for being with us today for this episode of Find Your Voice, Change Your Life. Each person Doreen interviews shares what has helped them find their voice. You can learn from these guests and find your voice so you can be confident to speak up and speak out. And remember to download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. We hope you enjoyed the show and will return next time. Until then, goodbye for now.